In 1929, Teddy Roosevelt Jr., who was the son of the former United States President Theodore Roosevelt, held the position of governor of the island of Puerto Rico. Speaking about the development potential of Puerto Rico under the tutelage of the United States government, he expressed that Puerto Rico could become the United States showcase to Latin America, showing the continent that a people of Latin blood could prosper living in a democratic system and implementing the method of thought imported from the United States of America, and that Puerto Rico was the ideal entity to show the benefits of the American banking and industrial system for the Latin countries. We must know that at the time these statements were made, Puerto Rico was a very poor jurisdiction with marked levels of backwardness in terms of the most important economic and social indicators. Even during the following decade, the 1930s, Puerto Rico continued to be immersed in a state of hardship and weakness. It was called the powerhouse of the Caribbean. But less than 40 years later, around 1976, Puerto Rico would reach living standards higher than those of all Spanish-speaking countries in the world, higher than those of Spain, Argentina, Venezuela, Uruguay, and Chile, with consumption rates exceeding half of the American consumption level, which is impressive when you take into account that in 1940, these rates barely reached 25% of the United States consumption. In 36 years, the average Puerto Rican's consumption levels of goods and services had more than doubled. In fact, in 1968, Plaza Las Americas was inaugurated, which is still, to this day, the largest shopping center in the Caribbean and the second largest in Latin America. Now, all of these bears the question, if Puerto Rico had been a U.S. jurisdiction since 1898, why was it not until the 1940s, and even more intensely during the 1950s and 60s, that Puerto Rico begins to develop rapidly, reaching levels of prosperity comparable to those of developed countries? Why did it take 50 years for the United States government and capital to realize the need and the benefits of developing Puerto Rico? Before delving fully into the topic, I will ask you to support me by liking this video, subscribing to my channel, and if you like the content, share this video. That's right, let's get to work, or in Spanish, manos a la obra, is the name given in Puerto Rican history to the set of initiatives that were promoted by the administration of the first Puerto Rican to be governor of the island under the United States authority, Luis Muñoz Marin. In English, these were called Operation Bootstrap. During his early days in politics, Muñoz Marin pushed for independence. He pushed for a sovereign and independent Puerto Rico. But later in his life, he took a turn and became a vocal defender of Puerto Rico remaining within the American sphere. What motivated him to take such a turn? To understand it, you have to see what Puerto Rico was at the beginning of the 20th century. The main and practically the only industry that employed large numbers of workers was the sugar industry. Large private North American corporations arrived on the island after it changed hands as a result of the war between the United States and the Kingdom of Spain, turning huge tracts of land into sugarcane fields. Workers often received salaries that were not enough to subsist on, forcing them to look for other activities to add to their income. Another element that aggravated the situation was the fact that sugarcane planting is an activity subject to seasonality, leaving a large number of workers unemployed for months. With the subsequent arrival of mechanization, thousands more lost their jobs, starting an intense migration phenomenon. Ironically, prior to the entry of the United States into the First World War, the Jones Act was approved, which made Puerto Ricans American citizens for the first time, therefore subject to being drafted in the armed forces. To make matters worse, in 1929, after the crash of the New York Stock Exchange, the United States entered what is known as the Great Depression, with devastating consequences for the world economy, hitting the American economy quite hard. Under the set of policies called the New Deal, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt introduced a series of social programs with the objective of alleviating the poverty of the masses who were being hit by the crisis. For Puerto Rico, this program became known as PRERA, Puerto Rico Emergency Relief Act. These programs, although they aimed to alleviate the impact of the crisis, fell short in terms of increasing productivity on the island, as it is explained by an article from Encyclopedia PR. The economic crisis in Puerto Rico also demanded immediate action by the authorities of the metropolis. Within the North American economic restructuring plans, funds were allocated to Puerto Rico to create an emergency aid plan. These funds resulted in the creation of two federal agencies, PRERA, Puerto Rico Emergency Relief Act, in 1933, and the PRRA, Puerto Rico Reconstruction Administration in 1935. Their objective was not the restructuring of the political and economic system of the island, but to alleviate misery, unemployment, disease, and hunger. With pre-era funds, infrastructure works were carried out that provided jobs for thousands of workers. Food was also distributed and preventive measures against malaria were created. However, the crisis and misery proved to be more acute than the tenuous palliative could remedy. Both agencies calmed immediate needs, but did not have the scope to transform the social-political structures that kept people destitute. But everything was about to change dramatically. On September 1, 1939, the German armed forces attacked Poland, starting World War II. Although the United States would not officially enter the war until 2 years later, the arms race became a priority. Puerto Rico hosted enormous military bases, and the island began to attract industries that supplied the materials for the construction of said facilities, as well as consumer goods for the army. In the same way, Puerto Rican sugar became much more valuable, since European sugar production was annihilated by the war. All of this contributed to inject an unprecedented economic dynamism to the island. It is also worth highlighting that the Puerto Rican governments of the time used the surplus resulting from such economic growth very wisely, investing in infrastructure projects that supported the installation of a growing industrial fabric. After the war, the Truman Doctrine, markedly anti-imperialist, meant that the old relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States required a dramatic transformation. This contemplated a transfer of political powers from Washington to the island. And for this, at the local level, a political sector was ideally positioned. This was the Popular Party, Partido Popular. Ironically, this party had its beginnings as a pro-independence party, but at the same time defending that the priority had to be lifting Puerto Rico out of poverty before moving to independence. However, its main leader, Luis Muñoz Marin, in view of the material progress which he had witnessed during the 1940s, saw it beneficial for Puerto Rico to remain within the American Union, but preserving its institutions that made it different, such as the Spanish language, the Latin American culture, among others. This was the origin of what we know as the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. The United States government felt more comfortable negotiating concessions of autonomy to the Popular Party, which was considerably more moderate in its demands than, for example, the Nationalist Party of Pedro Albizu Campos, which went so far as launching armed uprisings against American authority. Starting in 1947, the island promoted industrial incentives that included a relief from taxes for up to 25 years, lower labor costs than those of the continental United States, new infrastructure investments, and even subsidies for the training programs required to make Puerto Rican workers suitable for the manufacturing work. Puerto Rico entered a virtuous cycle that generated the emergence of a thriving middle class. Between 1948 and 1974, the economy had an average annual growth of 6%. Poverty fell precipitously. Puerto Ricans en masse gained access to better housing, better food, better clothes, cars, appliances, refrigerators, washing machines, as well as huge and modern shopping centers. Even for the poorest, let's just say that poverty became much more tolerable. The shanty towns known as arrabales were demolished, making way for public housing developments. And many began to receive federal aid for the purchase of food and the payment of public services. To this day, Puerto Rico continues to enjoy living standards that surpass those of virtually all Latin American countries. The United States dollar is the official currency. Puerto Ricans hold the American passport with the full right to live and study in any state of the Union. Not everything is rosy. When the tax incentives ran out and the salaries for the general population rose, the companies that were attracted by these left the island. After reaching its peak in terms of well-being relative to the United States in 1976, unemployment on the island began to increase, and dependence on federal funds maintained an upward trend. Certain industries, such as petrochemicals, left a heavy environmental liability. What is undeniable is that the process initiated with Operation Bootstrap meant that Puerto Rico was no longer the poorhouse of the Caribbean and became a benchmark for development in the Spanish-speaking world. At this point, I am interested in knowing what you think regarding the advantages and disadvantages of what Operation Bootstrap represented for Puerto Rico. Do you believe that the island could have achieved the same level of development with a different plan? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching this video, and please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it.